Designcast Podcast, the podcast for design and STEAM educators.
Hello and welcome to Designcast, a podcast where I interview a wide range of excellent guests in design and STEAM education to get their unique perspectives. My name is Jason Reagan, and I use my 20 plus years of experience as a design educator to dig deep into complex issues. This podcast has one simple mission: to create a community of people around the world that are interested in design and STEAM education. Each episode, I chat with guests from all corners of the design world, from classroom teachers to authors and even to educational consultants. We discuss a wide range of topics that we feel are relevant today. I do want to ask you that if you're enjoying this podcast, please leave a review, rate, subscribe, share, or download from your favorite podcasting app. This helps the podcast get discovered by listeners that might not find it otherwise. Also, it helps me to continually define the direction of future guests and episodes. Feel free to drop by my website, www.jasonreagan.ga, to leave me a comment or to sign up to be considered as a future guest on future episodes. Also, don't forget to stop by Anchor and leave me a voice clip that could even end up in an upcoming show. Thanks for listening, so let's get to it. A very special thanks to Mel Science for sponsorship of Designcast. Mel Science is a subscription service that offers monthly science boxes which combine hands-on experiments with VR and AR technologies to engage kids in studying science. Mel Science strives to make serious science accessible, interesting, and cool. Science is about exploration, experiments, discovery, and asking questions, all of which come naturally to all children. The Mel Science approach helps nurture children's natural interest in science by giving them fun, hands-on experiments to engage, serious detailed explanations to learn, VR and AR technologies to dive deeper. If you're anything like me and my family, it's hard to find creative ways to keep kids busy and screen-free while engaging their brains, especially these days. Mel Science does all the upfront work for you so you can spend more quality time tackling projects together and they won't even know they're learning. I recently received a kit, and it's really exciting all that comes in the box. There are many different activities and experiments in each kit which are enhanced through the integration of VR and AR. With Mel Science, there's something for every kid, including big kids like me. I encourage you to check out this unique service. As an added bonus of being a listener to this podcast, you can get 60% off your first box of any of the subscriptions by using the promo code DESIGNCAST, all one word, or by following the link in the show notes. Act fast, as this is an offer that is only available for 1 month. I can't wait to hear what you think of the service. All right, on this episode of Designcast, I was able to catch up again with my friend Kevin O'Shea. Kevin is a kindergarten teacher in Shenzhen, China at Shekou International School. He has loads of experience in creating content for other educators, and his podcasts are of very high quality. You can listen to any of his past podcasts, like the Just Japan podcast or the Making Better Teachers podcast, through the links in the show notes. His latest project is called Nature Talks Podcast, and a link for that can also be found in the show notes. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy this chat with Kevin O'Shea. Welcome back to another episode of Designcast. And today I welcome back a guest from an early episode, Kevin O'Shea. Kevin, how are you today?
I am fantastic, Jason. Thank you so much for having me on DesignCast again.
Well, I've been wanting to get you back on. It's been back and forth. I know you had a really long time kind of away from China last year, I guess, before you were back in. And I'm so glad you guys finally got settled. It was like watching a little bit of like one of these soap operas, one of the Latin soap operas, where it's really hopeless dramatic, trying to find out where you're going to live next. And that was crazy.
I was just going to say, the last time I was on the podcast, I was at an Airbnb in somewhere in Osaka, Japan, and that was an Airbnb that we had moved to. I think we moved 6 or 7 times, and that was when we stayed in only for like 2 days. It was just like, this is not a nice place. Yeah.
It was pretty small from what I can remember, but I'm sure they're mostly small, but how it is. So, Kevin, listen, can you just kind of update everyone about what your current role is and what you're doing?
Absolutely. Well, I'm teaching early years at Shekou International School, which is the oldest international school in Shenzhen, China. And when we say oldest, it's only about 30 years old, but Shenzhen, China itself it was founded in 1979. So it's a pretty new city. And for those who aren't aware of the geography, because I know I certainly wasn't before I came here, Shenzhen is located on the mainland side of Hong Kong. So it's literally, I look out my living room window and across the bay, there's Hong Kong territory. So it's down south. It's a pretty hot place. So I'm teaching kindergarten this year. Before, I was able to get out of that COVID limbo where I spent 9 months in Japan. I came back to Shenzhen, I think it was November of 2020. Yeah. And they had me bouncing around for a few months. I didn't actually have a set role at that point in time, and I was kind of a gap filler, so to speak. If they had teachers who were sick or they needed extra hands on deck for something, that's when I came into use. And then January of 2021, this year, they basically split. They had 3 kindergarten classes that were oversized. And that was all because of pandemic and, having trouble getting staffing and whatnot. They divided those 3 classes and they created a 4th class. And then I became a homeroom teacher again. And that was it was really wonderful to become a homeroom teacher again, because I wasn't really such a big fan of kind of being in limbo, not sure each and every day what I was going to be doing. But so I've been a kindergarten, and this year, the new school year began, of course, in August. And I am a kindergarten homeroom teacher. What else is new? I started pursuing environmental education courses through a Canadian university. So it's essentially what they call additional qualifiers. So I'm a teacher in the province of Ontario, Canada. And these are courses that are, extra training for Ontario teachers. And what I'm following right now, it's called environmental education specialist courses. So there's 3 of them. I've completed 1. And once I finish the 3, I will then be considered an environmental education specialist, and I could teach, of course, all elementary, middle, and high school as well. Yeah,
very cool.
So pretty exciting stuff. Because for those who know me, that's like right down my alley. I'm a big proponent of, or an advocate of outdoor learning. Environmental learning, which is kind of more of the holistic umbrella that outdoor learning fits into, teaching kids, connecting them with nature, with birds, bugs, all that goodness. And so that's where I'm at now, and something I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later. I'm now learning about beekeeping, so I'm dipping my toes in the world of beekeeping. I can't wait to talk to you
about that. Absolutely. I can't wait.
That's really exciting. It's something I've wanted to do for years and years. And finally, the opportunity presented itself to me this year where I can actually learn how to be a beekeeper. So that's where I'm at.
That is super cool, man. I'm not doing anything nearly as exciting as that, but hey, maybe soon. So, Kevin, you have a bit of a past life with a couple of different things. You did a podcast in Japan for a long time. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I was in Japan. Well, I've been in Asia actually since early 2002. And I did a stint a few years in Korea as an ESL teacher. And then I was in Japan for almost 10 years teaching at international school. And what I did, I was one of the first Japan-based podcasters. I had long commutes to work. Podcasting was still kind of a relatively new beast. And I loved listening to podcasts when I'd commute to school each and every day. And one thing I realized was that, there were podcasts about Japan with Japan content, but they'd kind of pop up, be around very briefly and disappear. And often they were, maybe a couple of ESL teachers who had arrived in Japan on something called the JET program. And they would make a very inside baseball kind of podcast about what they did. And I would listen and kind of be like, okay, I have no idea what they're talking about. I've never taught, I don't teach in public schools in Japan, and I'm not an ESL teacher, and I don't get it. So I decided to make a podcast that I wanted to listen to. And I in the past had podcasted, I had an earlier one, actually, a Canadian history podcast. And I am a Canadian, and I do like research into different topics and then like write scripts and read the scripts. And after about 8 episodes, I was bored to death of my own podcast.
And now it's history.
Oh, yeah, it was history. It was history a long time ago. That was like 2008, I think I had that one going.
Okay.
So I decided that if I was going to make a podcast that was going to have legs and something that I would be motivated to do for a long time, I needed to have guests. I needed to bring in different people with the different perspectives. And it was called the Just Japan Podcast. And I did about 200 episodes. And, each week I'd bring in a different guest who just had a different slice of life in Japan, and it was really cool. I had my little life as an international school teacher, but you realize there's so many people in a place like Japan or Korea or China, where I'm at now, who are doing really different, interesting, kind of out of left field things. And those are the people I wanted to talk to. So yeah, so that was the Just Japan podcast. And that was I learned a lot about the rigors of having a weekly interview podcast and how stressful it can be at times. You've been there, I'm sure, where you have guests lined up and all of a sudden at the last minute, they can't come on. And I've experienced that from both sides, as a host, but also as a guest, where it's like, I'm supposed to be recording a podcast in 20 minutes and my daughter has a fever and she just threw up, so I'm on Twitter feverishly direct messaging a host saying, I'm sorry, I just can't come on tonight. I apologize a million times. But yeah, so that was great. And again, I learned a lot about podcasting. I learned a lot about interviewing people. I forged a lot of real life lasting friendships from that podcast, which is really cool.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. I mean, you've just summed up what I've experienced over the past, I guess, 24 months of just being able to have access to people that I've really grown close to and really appreciate and admire, and am honored to have a chance to say that I know them. And it's been great. And so I think, I don't know about you, but my own podcast was really for me, and if anyone enjoyed it, great, right? And so it was therapy for me.
And that's it. That's it. I mean, I after the Just Japan podcast, I left Japan. I moved to China. I was in Beijing teaching, and I don't know, maybe it's something you're going to ask about, but I'll jump the gun on it. I created an education podcast. I created the Making Better Teachers podcast. And I did about 30 episodes of that. And then that kind of fizzled for me. And the reason why, it's exactly what you had just mentioned. You're making a podcast for yourself. And, if some people enjoy it, bonus. I don't think I was making the Making Better Teachers podcast for me. I think I was making it kind of for the teachers out there and trying to put together something I thought other people would like. And because of that, I just kind of, the spark went out for me, which is, a lot of people wonder what happened with that podcast. Well, it was a combination of that. And then I was stuck in Japan at the time during COVID, living out of a suitcase with my family. And it was a really stressful time. And having to deal with the podcast during a stressful time, a lot of things didn't work out. Yeah. So that podcast went the way of the dodo, simply because, like I said, I don't think I wasn't making that for me. I'm not sure what I was doing there, but I mean, it had success, and I met a lot of cool people. But again, it didn't have my heart in that one.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And I mean, I think if anyone's aspiring to do something like this or have a YouTube channel or even just to create content on a regular basis, it's got to be something you love. It's got to be something, that you really are interested in doing and that you find fulfillment in, for that very same reason, because there's moments where I get tired too. But usually it's because of outside sources, right? It's the stuff that all these things you just described, you've got this pressure from this or from that, and then it makes it really hard to kind of keep up. But I guess, it's right even when that sort of pressure kind of dies down, you go back to doing it. And so I think that, you're in the right sweet spot if that's the case.
Well, I mean, that's one thing I've learned over the years. I mean, I just love podcasting. It's just so much fun. I mean, I was a YouTube content creator for years and years. You know, I was an early adopter of that platform and vlogged in Korea for I started vlogging in Korea, actually, not well, but and then I vlogged for years in Japan. But podcasting is a different beast, and I've always been enamored with it. I've always had fun doing it. So, you know, that's part of the reason why you're talking to me today, you know.
That's right, man. That's right. And you know, you can, like you mentioned, you have a long commute. You can carry it with you in your pocket. Unlike a YouTube, yeah, you could have your YouTube video open, I guess, but sometimes you don't have the ability to have Wi-Fi or data or whatever. Yeah. And not everybody can get access to certain things. And so at least with with podcasting, people can download your episodes. They can use different catchers and streamers and all that kind of fun stuff. Awesome. Well, Absolutely. We've alluded to it, Kevin. Thank you for that very much. I appreciate it. We've alluded to it, but I want you to tell me about your newest project, because I'm super excited about this, and I know you are too, because you're doing it for you. And so tell me about this new project you're doing.
Cool. Yes. Well, thank you for, again, giving me a voice on your podcast, on your platform to share this, because it's a new little beastie I've got going here. So I just released a few days ago, episode 3 of the Nature Talks podcast, and it is an environmental education podcast. So it's something very near and dear to me, something I'm extremely passionate about. I always kind of say that one of my little missions in life is to connect as many kids and teachers with the natural world and try to light a spark and get them excited about biodiversity is a big one, you know, about the plants, the animals, everything around them, and lighting that fire so they care about these things and in turn want to do something to protect these things. So, you know, I've been kicking around this idea of an environmental education podcast for a long time, but you know, I finally got it going, and this is a passion project. This is something I care deeply about, and you know, it's something I know that I'm definitely not going to get rich from it. I'm not going to become famous from it, but I'm going to be really happy producing it. So essentially the premise is it's an education podcast, but I'm just going to be focusing on, again, the environment, about sustainability, biodiversity. And in episode number 1, which actually came out in July, and then it just sat there and I did nothing until earlier this month. Episode 2, it's an episode where I'm just talking about why all teachers should take the time to learn a little bit about gardening. And I talk about kind of my passion with gardening and how it is such an important way of connecting students with the environment. And in episode number 3, I interview one of my colleagues, a guy named Chet, who is a economics teacher at our high school, but he's also a beekeeper. And he's been a beekeeper since he was in middle school. And he had created a beekeeping project at our middle high school. And I've been very fortunate to be involved in that. We now have 6 beehives with native Asian honeybees and a group of enthusiastic teachers, and some very cool, enthusiastic middle school students have been taking care of these bees, learning about how to take care of bees, setting up the infrastructure on our roof of our middle school to support them. And that's what we talk about. And it's a fantastic, exciting project. And yeah, so it's really fun to share that with people out there, because I know that beekeeping is something that really fascinates a lot of people, and a lot of, especially with the current state of the world and the environment, more and more we're realizing how important pollinators are. But and this is something we talked about in the podcast. Normally we're just like watching videos on YouTube, showing kids videos, or just reading stuff from a book. But we now have something set up at our school where kids are going to be able to actually come and see, like, firsthand, like, this is what goes on. So that's, and the podcast itself is, you know, I plan on interviewing scientists, other podcasters, other educators, people who are doing just cool, you know, gardening projects, environmental projects, sustainability projects. Yeah, so that's where we're at with the Nature Talks podcast. It's a lot of fun, and so far, and right now I'm there's so many people I want to have on, and I'm really excited. I'm at that point of, again, because like you mentioned earlier, when you're doing something out of a passion, or you're doing something because you really enjoy it, it's not work, right?
That's absolutely right, man. And what's the response so far been from your first few episodes?
Episode 2 was kind of quiet. I got some positive response, and maybe I didn't market it a lot. Episode 3 just dropped earlier in the week, and on the weekend, and I pushed that more. And it's been fantastic. I mean, I had, Kath Murdoch retweet me
Oh,
and
that's
mention
right.
that.
I remember seeing
Yeah,
that.
I had a lot of fantastic people, a lot of like your colleague Levi, who had me on his podcast, Risa Studi, not long ago. He's been promoting me and shouting me out, and just kind of the who's who of the teacher Twitter sphere. But yeah, so it was great. Again, I've always been a fan of Kath Murdoch and her inquiry work. So when she's excited to listen to my podcast, I'm excited too. Yeah. So it's with anything, it's going to be a slow burn. We know that these things don't start off with lots of people listening. You got to build an audience and have like a back catalog of content. And then, so I've been through this before. So I'm not like looking at my analytics expecting hundreds, if not even tens of people. We start slow, but it's been positive so far. And I know that, as the weeks go on, the months go on, and I get more episodes and more great guests, it's gonna grow. And it's a topic that I think is still relatively niche, but it shouldn't be, because it is such a pressing thing with the state of biodiversity collapsing, climate change and all the crazy weather we're having in the world now, and species fragmentation, habitat fragmentation, all these different things. And these are all things I want to talk about on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. It shouldn't be something that's niche. Unfortunately, at the moment, I guess it is. But, you've been through this before, as you said. And so therefore, you're not going to be discouraged like I think a first-time podcaster might be, where they have a great idea and then they do 2 or 3 episodes, they don't get a great response, and they just sort of give up because like who's listening and that kind of thing. So I think it's great that you have that experience and that maturity and wisdom that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to have had. So I know that will serve you well, Kevin.
Thank you. Well, I mean, that's kind of the advice like I've heard over the years, where you have, like, for example, like a successful YouTube content creator, and when they're giving advice to a new content creator, they say, because you hear it, like there's like not just kids but adults too, they're like, I'm going to start a YouTube channel and become famous. Okay. Or and they put out 1 or 2 videos, and then they get, less than a dozen views, and they're crushed. But they don't realize that things take time, like when I watch, who's an example? I don't watch him so much anymore, but like there's a YouTuber named Philip DeFranco, who has the Phil DeFranco Show, which is kind of like his take on news. And he's got millions of subscribers. But I remember he was a daily YouTube content creator before there was even monetization, when people did not make money. You just did YouTube because you did YouTube and it was fun. And I mean, this guy's been at it for 15, 16 years of making daily videos. And now he's making good money, but he put in his work.
That's right. Yeah. And and that like you said, I mean, that's exactly right, that people don't know how hard the work is, because you have kids, I have kids, of course they often say, I was going to be a YouTuber. These guys make it look easy, but it's so much work that goes into it. And some people have gotten lucky, and they've just hit the market at the exact right time with the right formula. But in many cases, it's people who've worked really hard. And it makes me think of the .com times or startups and all these other things. You can't just rock right up and do that. There is some work that needs to be put in for that. And so I think you and I know that, which is great. And we're just going to keep on pushing, because, it does. People appreciate that when you put out, 100, 200 episodes, people know you're not going to just disappear, right? That this is something that you're passionate about. So, man, that's great, Kevin. So what do you think is going to happen next? What do you want to happen next? Let's say you get down the road a year from now, you have 30, 40, 50 episodes. What do you hope to happen?
What do I hope to happen? I'm just keen to grow my network. I'm keen to make more connections. I see myself, as I'm going through kind of some professional development work this year and following into next year, with my environmental education, with this podcast. If I have the opportunity, like, so for example, I'm going to be doing a presentation at the Early Years Exchange workshop series that's going to be in January. That's Taipei American School are hosting it. And, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a small virtual workshop about, kind of biodiversity, sustainability projects, and bees. And, I'll get to connect with a few teachers and share some knowledge. And I guess just sharing knowledge, to be honest. I mean, I suppose I don't have any grandiose plans. I just want people to take away, to have some good takeaways from the podcast, to get inspired, to get some ideas. I guess what I always want, I want teachers to get more excited about things. I want as cheesy as it sounds, and it's something that's come up on the podcast before, other podcasts I've talked about, when you have a campus celebrating Earth Day, you see all these incredible things happening. People outside having story time in the, in the garden under the trees, and people doing this and people doing that. The following day, everything gets packed away and you don't see anything like that happen again until the following Earth Day. But I want to see teachers being more involved in projects at school. I want to see more teachers getting excited about things. I want to become more knowledgeable as a beekeeper, and then maybe share that knowledge with other students and teachers. And yeah, again, I suppose no grandiose plans. This podcast is going to give me another platform to be able to kind of get the good word out that we need to do more as educators and as humans to help the environment. And maybe people sometimes struggle with knowing what they can do as an individual. And hopefully with future episodes and guests, I can get people on who can answer those questions for people and get people out there, listeners, excited.
Absolutely, man. That sounds great. That's exactly what I would hope to hear. It doesn't have to be anything grandiose. I think that's great.
Want a Ferrari. I want a Ferrari. That's what I want from this podcasting. Right. I want the big podcasting money. That's going to bring me the Ferrari.
Yeah. Well, if anyone's listening, I hate to break your image of this, but I'm not one of these big podcasters, so it is what it is. But hopefully we bring something to the table which people appreciate. So thank you so much, Kevin. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. I know that your podcast is awesome. You make great content. If people want to listen to what you've done with this podcast or any of your last, your former stuff, what's the best way to kind of check you out and check out what your work's been?
Yeah. Okay. Well, kind of all over the place. My former work, if there's a website called justjapanstuff.com, justjapanstuff.com. Everything's still up there. All of my former or previous episode, my 201 episodes of the Just Japan podcast, all there. So Just Japan Stuff. If you do a Google search for Making Better Teachers podcast, you'll find that those episodes are still out there. For the new one, the Nature Talks podcast, I did make a mistake. I should have checked to see if there were any other podcasts called Nature Talks before I created this one. And there's a couple actually. And one of them was by Nature Canada, which is a really fantastic NGO. And they had put together some really nice episodes of a podcast called Nature Talks a few years ago, but they just only did one season and that was it. But if you just do a Google search for Nature Talks podcast, maybe type in Kevin O'Shea as well, and it shall pop up. It is still a new podcast. There's only 3 episodes. So when it comes to kind of like analytics or what do they call that? SEO, that's it. It's just, there's not a lot out there yet. But if you search for that, there's also the Nature Talks podcast Facebook group. I've got a closed group, which I'm trying to grow. And then I'm all over Twitter at Mad for Maple. And then I'm always throwing the stuff around about the podcast on my Twitter and promoting it there. So yeah, it's all out there. Just Google away and you'll find it.
Well, I'll make sure to include those links in the show notes so people can get to it quickly. So that shouldn't be a problem for us to do. So Kevin, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me today. And I wish you all the best in your podcast endeavors.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciate being on Design Cast yet again.
Yet again, man. You're one of the lucky few who have had been the boomerang effect. I love it. Thanks so much, Kev.
Right, take care.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We will see you on the next episode.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of DesignCast. I'm Jason, your host, and I produced and created this podcast. If you have any input, I would love to hear from you, and I look forward to seeing you again really soon.